Welcome to the Baby Let's Talk podcast. My name is Ragna and I am your host. I am a medical doctor, a certified pre-postnatal trainer and a mother of 4, and I help moms reclaim their health and reach their goals through the power of movement, nutrition and overall healthy lifestyle. This podcast is born from my dedication to uncovering the truths about nutrition, exercise and lifestyle that genuinely benefit our bodies. We'll explore how to establish a lasting, healthy lifestyle that fits the reality of motherhood, how to enjoy an active, pain-free pregnancy, and how to navigate postpartum recovery to regain your fitness in a wholesome way. Join me as we debunk myths and discover the paths to excess energy, body confidence, and loving the life you live as a mom. Hi, and welcome to episode 9 of the Baby Let's Talk podcast. This episode is the first part in a 2-part series on weight loss. Today we're going to talk about kind of the surprising truth about weight gain, why we gain weight and why it's so difficult to lose weight. And then in our next episode we will go into more depth on how to lose weight. And in this episode we're going to cover why weight gain isn't just about calories in versus calories out, how calorie restriction damages our metabolism actually and promotes fat storage. We're also going to talk about the role of seed oils or vegetable oils in obesity and chronic disease. We're going to talk about how polyunsaturated fatty acids disrupt our satiety and drive overeating. We're going to talk about why modern diets and systems are actually designed for failure. And then we're going to go into the keys to addressing the root causes of weight gain. So, when most people think about weight gain, they usually boil it down to something super simple, eating more calories than you burn. Sure, and there's some truth to that, but let's be real here. The human body is way more complex than just a mathematical equation. There's a whole world of biology behind why our bodies store fat. Everything from how our cells make and use energy, to the hormones that tell us when to eat and how much to eat, to how easily our body absorbs the nutrients from the food we eat, how efficiently our cells make energy from these nutrients. In other words, how healthy our metabolism is, our cellular metabolism. That's one of the most important factors that determines what happens to the nutrients that we get in from the foods that we eat. And then there are a lot of other things that affect fat storage, things like stress and sleep, toxins in our environment, the kinds of food we eat, and so much more. And all these things play huge roles too in regards to whether our body continually stores more body fat or whether it sheds some of that body fat off. And today we're going to dive into all of that and take a fresh look at weight gain through the lens of cellular health and energy balance. And I'm telling you, this is a game changer. We are going to talk about why we put on weight and why overweight and obesity is higher than ever in today's society, as well as most other chronic health conditions for that matter. But we'll mostly focus on weight gain today, that is body fat gain in this episode. And we'll also get into the details of why it's so difficult to lose weight. So firstly, just a little bit on obesity and overweight. So obesity and metabolic issues are skyrocketing in today's society. And right now, there are over 890 million adults around the world that are classified as obese. And we'll go into the details of how obesity is defined later, but it's a body mass index of 30 or higher. Now, the usual explanation we hear is people just eat way too much and they don't move enough. But let's just be honest, that's a pretty shallow take. It doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of what's really going on. Weight gain is so much more than just calories in and calories out. Because if it were that simple, it would actually be so much easier for people who are overweight or obese or also normal weight people for that matter, to lose weight. Because the fact is that many overweight and obese individuals are in chronic calorie deficiency. They're in chronic calorie deficit. And also, when overweight or obese individuals take a period in their life where they work to lose the weight through calorie restriction, that is, they restrict their calories and start exercising more for a period of time, but when they go back to normal, even though it's done very precisely, that is, with the normal amount of calories, people do gain the weight back. And that's because they've ruined, or at least impaired, their metabolism with a calorie deficit. They've ruined their cells' ability to produce energy efficiently. So their body is in kind of a chronic state of low energy, which the body interprets as starvation. And basically, because of our body's cells are lacking energy, our body interprets that as lack in nutrition or lack in food. And that is dangerous. So the body, when it interprets lack in nutrition, lack in food, then the body turns up fat storage mode. That is, it does everything it can to firstly hold on to all the backup fuel that it does have available in stores, the body fat that we currently do have. And then secondly, when the body starts getting some more amount of nutrition in, when we go back to a normal eating habit and stop this calorie deficit period, it makes sure to put as much fuel to storage as it can, that is in our body fat, to have as much backup fuel available in storage if or when the body goes into a starvation period like that again. And it takes some time for the body to heal from this and trust in us so much that it will kind of snap out of this and get out of this pro-fat storage mode or state, or pre-hibernation state, you could say, and go into a normal metabolic state of living again. Weight gain is actually a symptom or a sign of impaired cellular energy metabolism. That is, it's a sign that something's off at the cellular level. Something is wrong with how our body produces and manages and uses energy. There's a disruption in energy homeostasis or energy balance in the body, and that all comes down to the cellular level. Now, regarding overweight and obesity, so obesity can be defined by either waist to hip ratio, with a ratio above 0.85 for women and 0.9 for men being defined as obese. But the most widely used tool to assess obesity is by the body mass index, or BMI, which describes a person's body weight divided by their squared height. And we have two formulas. The basic formula is as follows. BMI equals weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. And then we have the imperial BMI formula, which is BMI equals weight in pounds divided by height in inches squared times 703. Anyway, the BMI is not really a perfect tool. It's not fully accurate for example, bodybuilders who have a lot of muscle mass but very little fat. They often have a high BMI, even though they have little to no body fat. Just something to keep in mind. So it's not a perfect tool, but we use it. And worldwide, adult obesity and overweight has more than doubled in the last 30 years, since 1990. And adolescent obesity among teenagers, has quadrupled. That is 4 times the increase. And by the year 2000, the number of adults with excess body weight surpassed the number of normal weight or underweight adults. So there are more people today who are overweight or obese than there are normal weight or underweight adults. And in 2022, roughly 1.6 billion adults aged 18 years and older were overweight, that is BMI from 25 to 30. And then 890 million were obese with a BMI 30 or higher. And this equates to 43% of adults being overweight, 43% of men and 44% of women, and then 16% being obese. And just keep in mind that these are worldwide numbers. So worldwide, 59% of people are either overweight or obese. And the prevalence of obesity and overweight varies, of course, between regions, ranging from 31% in the Southeast Asia and African regions, and up to 67% in the regions of Americas. And in regards to children, in 2022, 37 million children under the age of 5 were overweight. And among children and adolescents aged 5 to 19, 230 million were overweight and 160 million, or 8%, were obese. So regarding obesity in this age group of 5 to 19-year-olds, only 2% were obese in 1990. But in 2022, 8% were living with obesity. And this is 4 times increase. And in only 40 years, obesity among school-aged children and adolescents with obesity has risen more than tenfold. And we're only talking obesity here. And in a study from 2016, there were 124 million obese children in this age group, but another 260 million were classified as overweight. And I can just imagine how much these numbers have increased in the last 8 years since that study was conducted. But new estimates from 2024 estimate that there are more than 1 billion people in the world that are now living with obesity, 890 million adults and 156 million children and adolescents. And then overall for overweight and obesity, nearly 3 billion people are currently living with either overweight or obesity. And this evidence suggests that most of the world's population today lives in countries where overweight and obesity are a bigger risk factor to health than underweight is. Now, the increase in overweight and obesity is happening wherever westernized cultures and eating habits are introduced. It is not seen in the few fully traditionally living populations that are left in the world. So this is not only happening in developed countries. Overweight and obesity is also increasing in developing countries that have been introduced to westernized foods. And what is especially worrisome is the increase in the youngest populations. And we all know that overweight and especially obesity is bad for our health, but why is that exactly? So first of all, obesity is linked to a higher risk of overall mortality. And a severely obese person can expect to live anywhere from 5 to 20 years less than one who is not obese. And being obese increases the risk for diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, and kidney disease, just to name a few. And it is also an independent risk factor for worse outcomes of getting various influenza viruses, such as the swine flu in 2009, the coronavirus, and influenza A. And in addition, obese individuals have weaker response to vaccines, and they have reduced protection from it. And what's even worse, the pro-inflammatory environment in obesity may actually promote the emergence of mutations of novel virulent influenza strains. So new types or mutations of influenza viruses, for example, are more likely to happen in an obese body because of the pro-inflammatory chronic state in an obese body, because obesity promotes an inflammatory state in the body, and that promotes mutations of these viruses. And studies have shown that losing a significant amount of weight can lower the risk of death in this group of people, as well as the other diseases like cardiovascular disease, cancer, and type 2 diabetes. But if we look away from the extreme factor here, obesity, is then having just some excess body adipose tissue or fat tissue bad for our health? Is it bad to have just a little bit extra fat tissue? Being just slightly overweight, for example, is that bad for our health? Does that have anything to say? And the short answer here is yes, it is. It is not beneficial for our health to have excess body fat, to have more body fat than necessary. So I'll explain this a little bit here and go into the details. So excess adiposity or excess body fat promotes the creation of reactive oxygen species in our body, or ROS, like we've talked about several times in our previous episodes. And in the long term, reactive oxygen species damage the mitochondria, the energy-producing factories of our cells, the engines of our cells, which leads then to a less efficient energy production process in our body. And in addition to that, Having excess fat tissue in the body causes an increase in pro-inflammatory substances called cytokines, and also leads to a decrease in other anti-inflammatory cytokines, which ultimately leads to more inflammation in the body. And why is that not good? Yes, chronic inflammation promotes a lot of diseases, and we know this. Diseases such as cancer, cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, major depression, immunodeficiencies, and autoimmune diseases, to name a few. And these are all promoted by chronic inflammation in the body. So we do not want to promote a state that promotes increased inflammation in our body, period. Now, the cause of this extreme increase in overweight and obesity in the past 100 years is often reported to be because of an imbalance of food intake or caloric intake and energy expenditure or caloric output. That is, that we take in more calories per day with our food than we use. And the reasons for this have been said to be, for example, that we eat too much food nowadays because of all the highly palatable processed foods and beverages that are available today. This is often talked about as the main reason for the increase in caloric intake in recent decades. But this is only partially true. So yes, the caloric intake per person has been increasing for the past 50 to 70 years, but we have had time periods before that, for example, when caloric intake decreased for some time, while obesity increased drastically despite that. And also after that, that is, the total caloric availability per capita decreased actually from 2004 until 2010 in the US, while overweight and obesity and type 2 diabetes and other chronic diseases continued to rise dramatically. So it doesn't quite add up here. And the extreme increase in overweight and obesity is more nuanced than simply being an overeating problem. It's not simply the fact that today food just tastes so insanely good that we cannot control ourselves, so we overeat and we're lazy and we don't bother to move, and therefore we gain weight. It's not so simple. And another thing that's often talked about is the increase in sugar consumption, for example, that it's the increased sugar consumption in today's society that has caused the increase in overweight, obesity, diabetes, and other chronic diseases. But again, research continue to show that this rise in these chronic conditions can't be fully explained by sugar consumption or by increased carbohydrate consumption. And just a little side note here, it all comes down to worse metabolic health. So we're getting worse and worse metabolic health, and when the metabolic health or our metabolism becomes more and more impaired, we are less better able to handle carbohydrates and sugars. So yes, we can have a problem with sugar and carbohydrates, but that's often because of an underlying problem, because we have a problem with our metabolism. But it's not always simply only carbohydrates or sugar that has caused the disruption in our metabolism, and we'll get into that. Now, if we look, for example, at the case of Japan, and this data is from Dr. Chris Konobe's research, who was a guest on my previous episode, and I have his permission to use his graphs and explain this to you. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the graph that I have up here. So for the Japanese population, calorie consumption has been going down from 2,837 calories per day in 1960 and down to 1,850 calories per day in 2010. Sugar consumption went up from 1960 to 1989. It went from being 196 calories per day to 384 in 1989, but it has actually been going down ever since, and it was 282 calories in 2010. Carbohydrates were about 84% of total calories in 1960, but only 56% of calories in 2010. But obesity increased from 16% in 1979 to 31.2% in 2010. And in regards to fat intake, the total fat intake increased from 5% of total calories per day in 1960 to 27% in 2010. But it's not saturated fats that's been increasing. That is animal fats. It's not animal fats they're only 7% of total calories in 2010. The only thing that's been increasing drastically in this time period in the Japanese population, in the Japanese diet, is vegetable oils or seed oils. Seed oil consumption went from being 81 calories per day in 1961 to 351 calories per day in 2010. And we see that the obesity curve looks strikingly similar to the vegetable oil curve. It's going up in the same fashion while calories, sugar and carbohydrates are all going down. And if we look at diabetes, it's the same upward trend here. And then the same goes for breast cancer, a 5-fold increase from 1975 to 1999, and age-related macular degeneration or AMD, which is an eye condition that is the leading cause of severe vision loss and blindness in developed countries, an 82-fold increase from the 1970s to 2013, and the list goes on and on when we look at chronic diseases. So this, the case of Japan, is the perfect scientific experiment actually on diet, spanning 60, 70 years, and we see it so clearly that it's actually not increased calorie consumption that's driving obesity and other chronic diseases. It's not simply sugar consumption or carbohydrate consumption or the consumption of saturated fats for that matter. The biggest influencer here is the increased consumption of vegetable oils or seed oils. And what is it about them that is so dangerous and drives this? We have talked about this in the episode on polyunsaturated fatty acids in the last episode with Dr. Chris Kenobi. And it's that vegetable oils contain high amounts of the omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids, especially the 18-carbon omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid called linoleic acid or LA. And we see that for the Japanese population, omega-6 consumption went from about 1% in 1960 to about 7.8% in 2010. And it's the same for the rest of the westernized world. If we look at the US, for example, the daily omega-6 fatty acid consumption in 1865 was about 2.4 grams per day. That's about 1.1% of daily caloric intake of people back then that was coming from linoleic acid. And at this time, the most common chronic conditions that we know today, like type 2 diabetes, obesity, coronary heart disease, Alzheimer's, AMD, these diseases were almost unheard of at this time. This number had then doubled in 1909 because of the introduction of cottonseed oil. So the daily consumption of omega-6 or linoleic acid was about 4.84 grams per day, equaling 2% of total calories. So it had gone up from 1.1% to 2%. And then fast forward to 1999, when the consumption of animal fats were less than half of what it was in 1909. And the majority of the fats in people's diets were coming from vegetable oils, the heart-healthy oils. Omega-6 consumption was 18 grams per day, or 7% of daily caloric intake. And then in 2008, the amount of daily omega-6 consumption was up to 29 grams per day. That is 11.8% of daily caloric intake. Vegetable oils contain everything from 20 to 78% omega-6, whereas in animal fat, omega-6 fatty acids are only 1 to 2.5% of the fat. And we only need about 0.5% of our daily calories coming from linoleic acid. We don't need more than that. So omega-6 is an essential fatty acid, yes, but we only need 0.5% of our daily caloric intake coming from linoleic acid. But we are getting way too much of them in our diet. So the argument that seems to have emerged with the marketing of vegetable oils, that we must add vegetable oils to our diet to meet our needs of these essential fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6, is actually not accurate. If we eat like our ancestors have for thousands of years, that is meat, animal products and fish together with some fruits and then maybe some vegetables or honey, we get our daily dose of omega-3 and omega-6 easily. We don't have to add the vegetable oils. But you see, what has happened after the introduction of vegetable oils in our diet is that the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in our diet has gone through the roof. And that's because vegetable oils are so rich in omega-6 fatty acids. So this ratio should be about 1:1 and up to 4:1 omega-6 to omega-3. No more than that. But in the standard westernized diet, this ratio is up to 52:1 omega-6 to omega-3. And in my experience, a lot of nutritionists and doctors and health advocates, they do see eye to eye on this, that the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in today's westernized society is too high. But still, a lot of people don't seem to agree on the reason for this and therefore how to address this. That is, a lot of the mainstream dietitians and nutritionists and doctors claim that in order to fix this, we need to increase our omega-3 intake to level this out again. Because it is universally agreed that omega-6 fatty acids are, in increased amounts, pro-inflammatory and pro-oxidative and not good for our overall health. That's agreed upon. So we just need to up our omega-3 intake to make up for the detrimental effects of too much omega-6. But the problem here is not that we're not eating enough omega-3 in our diet. It's that we're ingesting way too much omega-6 fatty acids in our diet. And that's what's making this ratio, omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, so high. It's not the fact that we're eating too little omega-3, it's the fact that we're eating way too much omega-6. And this is happening through the ingestion of vegetable oils or seed oils in our food. So I just don't understand it when I'm entering discussions with people on this, that they can't see this, that they don't see this or refuse to see this. The solution here is therefore to reduce the intake of omega-6 fatty acids and not to keep ingesting this ridiculously high amounts of omega-6 and then just compensate for that with also increasing omega-3 to much higher levels than we need. Now, the reason why a diet that is so high in omega-6 is dangerous is that these fatty acids accumulate in our body, in all our tissues, not only in our fat tissue, but in all cells, because cell membranes, the outermost layer of all cells in our body, are made up of fatty acids, among other things. And when these fatty acids then become pro-oxidative, meaning that oxidative stress in our body increases, pro-inflammatory, meaning that the inflammation increases in our body, they become toxic through increased production of advanced lipid oxidation end products, or ALs, and they cause nutrient deficiency because they block energy production at the level of our mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of our cells, the structures that produce usable energy from the nutrients in our foods. And this is the perfect recipe for metabolic disease and physical degeneration. So the solution here is not to add more omega-3 to our diet, because we'll still have way too much omega-6 that has accumulated in our body, in our fat tissue, and in all our cells. Now, let's talk a bit more in detail about the nutrient deficiency part here, because this is very important and likely one of the most important factors in regards to what drives weight gain and obesity. So when the energy production process gets diminished or blocked because of the increased amounts of PUFAs, or polyunsaturated fatty acids, in our tissues, this leads to increased oxidative stress, which disturbs the energy production process in our cells. So we get reduced energy production. Less usable energy is produced from the nutrients that are absorbed from our food. So when this happens, our body craves more food to make up for this reduced energy. We don't get full as easily after meals. We're always hungry, even though we just ate a large meal. We're always feeling out of energy and craving snacks or in between meals because we're always hungry. Our body is always in need of more usable energy. So increased amounts of PUFAs, such as linoleic acid from vegetable oils, leads to less efficient energy production process at the levels of our cells. So our body doesn't produce enough usable energy from the foods that we're eating, even though we're eating enough calories. And when our body doesn't produce enough usable energy, it interprets this as a lack of energy, making us hungry so that we will go find food to eat because our body needs more usable energy. And so when our body's energy production is damaged and we can't produce enough usable energy from the nutrients that have come in, then we need to do something with the nutrients that have been absorbed from our foods and we can't produce usable energy from. So we then put that to storage in our fat tissues to use later because we can't use it now. So when our metabolism is damaged like this and we're in a low energy state, then our stress hormones are upregulated to help our body to use fatty acids for the most part for energy production in tissues that are able to use fatty acids as fuel for energy production. Because a lack of usable energy in our body, a low energy state, is interpreted by our body as a lack of glucose, which is the most important source of energy for all our cells. But most importantly for our brain and nervous system, which cannot use fatty acids as fuel for energy production. So we go into this energy preserving state or energy conservation state to save up as much glucose as we can for the most important tissues. And the way we do that is by upregulating our stress hormones. And we've talked about this in great detail in the foundational episodes, the first 7 episodes of this podcast. So check them out if you want to dive deeper into these mechanisms or freshen up your memory. So when stress hormones are upregulated, it makes our peripheral tissues more resistant to insulin, so that they rather shift to using fatty acids as fuel instead of glucose, because we need to save the glucose for tissues like the brain. So cells and tissues like muscle tissue, fat tissue, etc., tissues that are able to use fatty acids as fuel for energy production, they become more insulin resistant and start using fatty acids as fuel for the most part instead. And this state then further drives this state. And then we don't handle glucose from carbohydrates as well as we used to. So we become more glucose intolerant. And this is basically what happens in metabolic disease and type 2 diabetes. And one thing we need to make absolutely clear is that when we are in this low energy state, stress hormone driven state, and we are using more fatty acids as fuel for energy production, this may sound very appealing in regards to weight loss, that of course we'd want to upregulate this state of fat burning mode, the state of burning more fat for energy production. But there are a lot of issues with being in this state, such as, firstly, even though we're burning more fat for energy production, this state is also a pro-fat storing state. So we put actually more fatty acids into storage than we otherwise have done. So in the end, the net effect always ends up being that we put more fat to storage than we use. Secondly, being in this stress-driven low energy state affects our metabolism in a very negative way. That is, the basal metabolic rate, or BMR, decreases, and the longer we stay in this state, the lower the BMR becomes and our metabolism becomes less and less efficient. So yes, you can lose some weight by restricting your calories, but the longer you do that, the more inefficient your metabolism becomes, and you will just further drive this state. So whenever you want to come back to normal, it's going to be a mess and you're going to gain the weight again. And we'll get into that. Now, thirdly, a low energy state can disrupt thyroid hormone production and utilization, but thyroid hormones play a critical role in regulating metabolic rate and energy production. So in a state of a low energy state, the body often prioritizes energy conservation, like we've talked about, leading to reduced conversion of the inactive thyroid hormone, thyroxine, or T4, into its active form, T3. And this occurs because the enzymes that are responsible for this conversion require adequate cellular energy and a healthy oxidative environment to function. But that is compromised in low energy states. So, in addition to this, we also get increased reverse T3 instead of converting T4 to active T3, and this is a protective mechanism to slow down the metabolism during perceived energy scarcity or starvation. And apart from this, PUFAs, or polyunsaturated fatty acids, do also directly suppress the thyroid. That is, too much PUFAs in the diet can inhibit thyroid function by suppressing the release of thyroid hormones from the thyroid gland itself and interfering with cellular uptake and action of T3. And PUFAs also promote systemic inflammation and oxidative stress, like we've talked about, which can further impair thyroid function. Now, since we're on the topic of PUFAs, or polyunsaturated fatty acids, one extremely important factor of how they make us fat, sick, and unhealthy, and this is something not a lot of people are aware of, I think, is through how they mess with our body's satiety signals. And we're going to get into details here now, so listen up, because I know you're going to find this interesting. So when PUFAs, particularly omega-6 fatty acids like linoleic acid, are metabolized in our body, one metabolic product is endocannabinoids. That is, they are converted into endocannabinoids, which can significantly affect appetite, fat storage, and energy regulation. And here's why. So linoleic acid, the primary omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid in our diet, in vegetable oils, is converted into arachidonic acid, or AA, in our body. And arachidonic acid is then further metabolized into endocannabinoids, such as anandamide, which is known as the bliss molecule. It mimics the effects of cannabinoids that are found in cannabis. And then we have 2-AG, another potent endocannabinoid. Now, these compounds act on cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2 in our brain and in our body, which influence appetite, metabolism, and fat storage. So they cause increased appetite, increased fat storage, and then blunted satiety signals. That is, in regards to increased appetite, when endocannabinoids activate the CB1 receptors in the brain, they lead to increased appetite. So they stimulate appetite, which then often leads to overeating or increased cravings for calorie-dense foods. And this effect is similar to the munchies that people experience after cannabis use, which also activates the CB1 receptors in the brain. Now, in regards to fat storage, activation of the CB1 receptor promotes fat storage by enhancing or upregulating lipogenesis, which is fat creation in the body, and by reducing fat breakdown or lipolysis. So this favors, again, weight gain or body fat gain over body fat loss. And then, in regards to blunted satiety signals, elevated endocannabinoid activity in our body can interfere with hormones like leptin, which is responsible for signaling fullness, and then ghrelin, which triggers hunger, and therefore leading to disrupted hunger satiety regulation. So modern diets that are high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids, they do contribute to an overactivation of the endocannabinoid system, which leads to increased food intake, desensitization to satiety hormones, and an increased risk of obesity. That is, excessive endocannabinoid production heightens appetite and cravings and drives overeating and poor dietary choices. Chronically elevated endocannabinoids reduce the effectiveness of leptin, making it harder to feel full. And studies have shown that overactive CB1 receptor signaling is associated with obesity, metabolic syndrome, and increased fat accumulation. So, polyunsaturated fatty acids, particularly omega-6 fatty acids, mess with our satiety by converting into endocannabinoids, which stimulate appetite, promote fat storage, and disrupt hunger-satiety balance. So the easiest and most basic solution to this problem, to fix this overactivation of the endocannabinoid system in our body that is making us fat and sick, is to reduce the amount of omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids like linoleic acid in seed oils, for example, in our diet. But when you start doing some research on this topic, that is the role of the endocannabinoid system in the development of overweight, obesity, metabolic syndrome, etc., most of the studies are focusing on possible exploitation of endocannabinoid system components as novel drug targets for therapeutic intervention. That is, how to make a drug to block this system and help people lose weight. Because this system is overactivated in today's society, so how do we make a pill to block this system? Instead of looking at this and just saying, oh, okay, let's just cut the main source of omega-6 LA in our diet and then 90% of these problems will be solved. Why don't they do that? And that's not a difficult question to answer. You just follow the money. There's no money in that solution. You can't sell that. You can't profit off of that. And the food production companies lose on that as well. Because modern processed foods are flooded with seed oils, making the food production cheaper, increasing the shelf life of the food, making people eat bigger doses of the foods and craving more, making them addicted to the food, buying more and more of the foods. And they do that by messing with people's metabolism and satiety. And then ultimately leading to people becoming fat and sick, so that we need some form of medical treatment to fix that. And big food, big pharma, they're on the same team. So the problem does not lie with the people. The problem lies with the system, our whole food system. Overweight, obesity, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, cancer, AMD, depression, anxiety, infertility, autism, ADHD. The exponential increase in these conditions in all westernized countries are not because of gluttony and laziness of the people, but by a poor food and health system that has the wrong values. And I'm not going to get any more political than this right now. This can get quite political quickly, but this is basically it. And this is essentially the true cause of overweight and obesity and most other chronic health conditions. And it's the same reason why it's so difficult to lose weight in today's society. It's not because you are lazy or you have no self-control or you're not strict enough or not good enough, etc., etc. No, it's because the system around you is designed for you to fail at this. Period. So you have to break out of it, look at all the facts from a distance and make your own decision about what you believe is right and follow that. Even though that means that you're going against what you've always believed in or always thought of and or what your friends and family believe and they think you've suddenly gone mad. Just do what you believe is best for you and stick to it. And also, you don't have to advertise it to everyone, if you're afraid of rubbing someone the wrong way. But if you are, for example, not thriving, you have some health problems, you want to lose weight and or get in shape, and you struggle with that, you've tried over and over again, but you keep failing or you never quite get there, be open to the idea that you may need to look within, reevaluate everything you know already about food and exercise and lifestyle, and maybe make some changes. But if you are thriving and everything's great, then great, don't make any changes to your lifestyle. I'm not forcing anybody. But if not, then you might want to make some changes. And understanding what is really causing the increase in all these chronic health conditions today may be a good place to start. Now, in our next episode, we will get into the good stuff on how to lose weight without losing your health. How to lose weight in a healthy, sustainable way. So, see you next time. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you're looking for more information or want to check out any studies I reference, head on to my website, babyletsmove.com. You can also join me for a workout through my app called Baby Let's Move, available in both App Store and Google Play. And don't forget to connect with me on Instagram and YouTube for even more content. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider giving it a 5-star rating or a like and share it with a friend. It really helps me reach more amazing listeners like you. Until next time, keep moving and stay healthy.